Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on the eve of this historic election tomorrow. Glad to have you with me on the Radio Northwest Network, and really glad to have back on the show after way too long, Ken Vance, who is the editor of Clark County Today. Ken, how are you?
I'm great. It's an honor to be with you, Lars.
Listen, it has been too long since you've been on the show, but you've got something that might actually have an effect on the way people vote if they haven't been foolish enough to vote weeks ago and drop their ballot in the mail and all that. I saved mine for the last day. I mean, I made my choices this weekend, but I'm going to actually deliver my ballot tomorrow. But this has to do with one of the candidates running for Clark County Sheriff. What should people know about John Horch?
Well, that's exactly what it started out to be, Lars. There was a lot of information circulating in our community about John, and, I thought it was appropriate for me to take a deeper dive into that information, and I felt a burden to provide the voters with that information. I wish I would have done it a little bit earlier, but nevertheless, these things take time. And so I did present some information on, I believe it was October 28th, about candidate Horch and his past performance issues while with the Clark County Sheriff's Office. He's been with Clark County Sheriff's Office for over 30 years. And there's certainly some past performance issues in his file. I felt the most egregious of which was he collected a handgun from a suicide scene, and he didn't turn it into evidence until he was later confronted by this missing gun. And he eventually said, oh, yeah, it's in the trunk of my patrol car. And I believe that's the most egregious. And, we won't get into why I believe, but you can imagine why that's the most egregious. And then there's other issues. He ripped a couple of, I should say he removed a couple of diversity posters from the walls of the precinct. He admitted back in 2003, 2004, he was going through a very rough time. He offered the fact that he had a problem with alcoholism. He was going through a divorce. He himself offered that there were over 12 domestic violence calls during that time to his home involving his divorce. And there was other issues, performance issues. But then this story took on another life in that there was accusations that there were missing internal affairs documents from John Horch's file. So as I looked into that, I stumbled upon this story that back in 2013, 2014, the Clark County Sheriff's Office discovered that they had all these internal affairs documents and nothing had ever been done with them. They were sitting in boxes unattended. And so they started this massive project to go through these boxes and determine one of two things. Should the internal affairs documents be sent to the Clark County Prosecuting Attorney's Office for review for potential Brady guideline violations or other violations, which leads to, the disclosure to defense attorneys in the area who are prosecuting cases involving these deputies. And so that would be one avenue. And then the second avenue, if there's nothing in these internal affairs documents, they would be put on a path towards destruction.
Right.
And obviously.
Oh, by the way, Ken, can I interrupt for a moment? Just so people know,
Absolutely.
Brady Act, and feel free to correct me, Ken. Brady, the Brady Declaration is if you have a police officer who's been found to be untruthful in his official duties, then the defense attorneys say we have a right to know that, so that if we're defending somebody and that deputy or police officer has been involved in basically telling lies in the past, we have a right to raise that as an issue when that deputy or police officer testifies against an accused person. And that seems reasonable. I mean, even to a non-lawyer, non-cop, you'd say, well, if you've got a history of lying, my defense attorney should be able to know about that, shouldn't he?
You characterize that very accurately, Lars.
All right. So with all this, and Horch is the connecting pin on all of this?
Well, not necessarily. And, he is from the standpoint of, we deserve to look into his past as a candidate for Clark County Sheriff. But as I said, the story and the situation is much greater and much more serious than that, in that I have reported that as many as 60 boxes of internal affairs documents were handed over to the Clark County Prosecuting Attorney's Office in 2013 and 2014. This process took several months, and they were turned over by the Clark County Sheriff's Office. There was a record of these documents being transferred to the Prosecuting Attorney's Office. There were spreadsheets attached to each box that were both physical spreadsheets and digital spreadsheets. Yeah. So there should be a record of that, and then whatever documents were sent off for destruction, there should be a log for that. And when I called the Clark County Prosecuting Attorney, Tony Golick, who became Clark County Prosecuting Attorney in 2011, joined that office in 2000, so he was certainly the man in charge in 2013 and 14, he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what your sources are talking about. And my sources are the Clark County Sheriff, Gary Lucas, and his former Chief Civil Deputy, Aaron Nolan. And Aaron and one other Clark County staffer were the ones who completed this process. Actually, they were not allowed to complete the process, but they completed a great portion of the project before current Sheriff Chuck Atkins took office and shut it down. But nevertheless, as many as 60 boxes of documents were transferred from the Clark County Sheriff's Office to the Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and the Prosecuting Attorney says, I don't know what you're talking about.
And the current Clark County Sheriff's Office Chief Criminal Deputy is John Horch. So I'll tell you what, I'll offer candidate Horch a chance to respond today or tomorrow if he wants to. But the other issues, I think you're right. That is the most important issue. I'm talking to Ken Vance, who's editor at Clark County Today, but also not turning a weapon in, breaking the chain of custody, leaving it in his car trunk, suspension for destroying posters, and then saying, well, I had a drinking problem and I was going through personal troubles, and 12 domestic violence calls. I think all those raise, the reasonable question, do you have the temperament to be in charge of a law enforcement agency that affects an entire county? It's a reasonable question. I'd love to hear the candidate's response.
Yeah, I hope you get his response. He was very cooperative with me for the October 28th story. I hope he does respond to you. And I'm not going to editorialize on that situation. I'm going to let the voters make their own decisions. But that's my job as a journalist, just to present them the information. But yes, I do believe I was burdened by the fact I do believe the voters deserve this information.
And how is it that, I don't think I'm being unfair to you, Ken, in describing Clark County Today as a relatively small organization, which means limited resources. How is it the Columbian didn't get onto this? How is it the Daily Dead Fish Wrapper Oregonian didn't get onto this? How is it that this story flew under the radar of everybody else in a fairly major sheriff's election? Ken, we're going to encourage people to take a look at your story at Clark County Today, and I appreciate you taking the time. We'll look forward to you coming back. I'll get to your phone calls and emails in just a moment.